Mad Panic Game.
Awesome!
Hey everybody, Jim here, welcome back to Mad Panic Gaming, where today we've got bullets, bombs, and spaceships abound, because we are taking a look at 8 more absolutely awesome shoot-em-ups, some of which had home ports and some that never saw the light of day outside the sacred grounds of the almighty arcade. And today we're getting started with a game that I only played for the first time very recently, and instantly fell in love with it, and that is Cybattler. This is a 1993 release that was published by Jalico and developed by Hamster Corporation, whom you might know better for their work on the Cybattler series, another great bunch of shooters. With Cybattler, we've got a vertically scrolling mech shooter, and if you know anything about me, you know I love some giant mechs in space, so it already got bonus points for that, but the gameplay here is especially awesome. Instead of being locked into firing in a single direction, you can fire in all 8 directions, which is good news, because the enemies in this game come at you from all sides, and with a variety of means to destroy you. And each stage gives you a slightly different weapons loadout, but basically you have a primary blaster rifle that you can collect energy power-ups for, increasing its strength and rate of fire, and you get a beam sword that causes massive damage and is great for when enemies get a little too close for comfort. You have a health bar in Cybattler, so it does take a few hits to take you down, and you can occasionally pick up health replenishing power-ups. But you only get 1 life per credit, and you are sent back to a checkpoint when you die, which you very likely will numerous times because Cybattler is certainly no pushover, but holy hell is it fun. Every stage feels unique, throwing different enemies and stage hazards at you in each one, and the boss battles go from fairly standard to absolutely insane, all with some outstanding graphics and sound. Upon first playing this game a few months ago, I was shocked that I'd never even heard of it before because it's so damn good, but since then, I've spent a lot of time with it and I can confirm that Cybattler is certified awesome. And thankfully, it's now available digitally on both the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation Network as part of the Arcade Archive series. So whatever way you can, give Cybattler a try and prepare to be blown away. Next up, we have a game that apparently never got an official release despite the fact that it was pretty much completed and even field tested at select arcades in Japan. And that's Wing Force, which was developed by Atlus and intended to be released in 1993, but was shelved for some reason until eventually the ROM was made available online, so now all of us shmup enthusiasts can play and enjoy it. And yeah, it's a pretty decent shooter, not mind-blowing, but a solid playing and fun game. It's basically another in a long line of games that did their best to emulate the gameplay of the Raiden series while also throwing in at least a little something to set it apart. Here you start out with a rather weak basic shot, but by collecting power-ups, your ship receives a layer of armor that comes with an upgraded weapon. And these include a spread shot, a laser, and a missile barrage. And each one can also be further upgraded with more power-ups. If you get hit once though, you lose your armor and you're back to your basic shot, and if you get hit again, you lose a ship. You also get a supply of super bombs for when things are getting a little too hairy, and that's about it. Just blast everything in sight, collect score bonuses, rinse and repeat, until you get to the end of the game, at which point a new loop starts. It seems like you're headed for a final boss fight, but then the game just starts over. So I guess that's something that was left unfinished. That aside though, this is a pretty damn good shooter that's moderately challenging, and features some pretty good graphics and sound design as you might expect from a game developed by Atlus. Again, not the greatest shooter ever made or anything, but nothing really to complain about. If you like a good shooter, especially those in the same vein as Raiden, then load up MAME, go grab that ROM, and give Wing Force a shot. Next up, let's take a look at a game from 2000, and again, a game that I played for the first time fairly recently, and immediately loved it, and that is Vasara, which was developed and published by Visco, which is the developer that has a long line of arcade games under their belt, including a lot of Neo Geo games, such as the Drift Out series, Breaker's Revenge, and another decent shooter, Andro Dunos. But where that game is a pretty run-of-the-mill spaceship shooter, Vasara goes for a melding of feudal Japan and futuristic technology, and it kind of feels like a long-lost sequel to the Sengoku Ace series. You have a few different characters to choose from that fly through the air on rocket cycles as they destroy everything in sight, including tanks, planes, samurai, ninjas, and giant mechs. The gameplay, for the most part, is pretty typical. You collect power-ups to increase your firepower, and you have a limited supply of screen-clearing super bombs. Something unique here though, and especially useful, is that you have a charge attack in the form of your katana sword. This is a very powerful attack, and it has a secondary use, in that it can also cancel out bullets. And with this being a borderline bullet hell shooter, this is an indispensable ability. Also, as you destroy enemies, they spew out red crystals, which can not only be collected for score bonuses, but they also fill up an additional power meter that, when full, allows you to perform the super powerful Vasara katana attack, slashing up everything in sight and enjoying some brief invulnerability. This is simply a fantastic shooter that features some very fun and challenging gameplay that had me hooked right away. Plus, the graphics and sound design are also especially good. Again, a game that I was surprised I hadn't played sooner, because this is exactly the kind of shooter that's usually on my radar. And aside from the arcade, Vasara is currently available on Steam along with its sequel, so one way or another, give this one a try. Vasara is awesome. Next up, since we took a look at Space Fortress Macross in the last video, let's take a look at its sequel, Space Fortress Macross 2 from 1993. Developed by NMK and published by Banpresto, this is a very different game from its predecessor. For starters, this is a horizontal shooter where the first game was vertical, and this game features a very unusual time-based gimmick where in each stage you're tasked with racking up a certain score before the time runs out. So essentially the entire game is one big caravan mode, which I suppose is great for two reasons. One is that it's an additional challenge, and two is that as a coin-op it could have players starting and finishing games fairly quickly. Similar to the first game though, you can swap back and forth between a fighter jet and your Gerwalk form with power-ups, each having their own weapons, and you can also pick up multiple types of missiles and, of course, super bombs. But instead of just a bomb, you transform into your Batroid form to launch a barrage of super missiles, which is pretty cool, but I'd rather have the Batroid as a playable form, as it was my favorite in the first game. When you start a game, you have a choice between 3 different difficulty levels, each with 3 stages that get progressively more difficult as you're tasked with getting higher and higher scores to clear each one. So even after you defeat a stage boss, if there's still time on the clock, then there's still more game to play. Honestly, I do prefer the first game over this one. It's an overall better game, I feel, but that's not to say that Macross 2 is bad, because quite the opposite. It's pretty damn good. It's fun, and the time attack gimmick is pretty cool and adds an extra layer of challenge. This is also, again, a very good looking game with some especially colorful and detailed stages, and it features a pretty damn good soundtrack too. So there's very little to complain about with this one. It is still to this day an arcade exclusive though, so as usual, MAME is your best friend. Next up, another sequel to a game we looked at in the last video. This is Thunder Dragon 2. Though oddly enough, the Japanese version's title screen says it's Thunder Dragon 3, even though it definitely isn't. This is a 1996 release and yet another game developed by NMK, so they definitely knew their way around a shooter. I said the first game was very much inspired by the Raiden series, and it certainly was, but this game takes that same basic formula and simplifies it quite a bit. Where the first game has 4 different main weapons to swap between, Thunder Dragon 2 gives you one basic spread shot that increases in strength with power-ups, and you can also pick up missiles and super bombs. If you lose a ship, then you lose your missiles and drop down 1 power level. It's about as basic of a shooter as you can play, but Thunder Dragon 2 does feature one unique gimmick to the gameplay, and that is fast forward, which you probably wouldn't even notice on your first playthrough, but the faster you destroy airborne enemies, the faster that more of them spawn, and the higher value score bonuses they leave behind. So if you want to rack up a big score, you'll be wanting to destroy as much as possible, as quickly as possible. That aside, this is just another well-made and fun shooter that presents a decent challenge, but is kind of lost in the shuffle because to look at it, this isn't really a game with a lot of flashy gimmicks, aside from the fact that you can shoot down all of the credits, of course. It's also a decent looking game, if a bit bland, and the soundtrack is actually really good, so all the way around, this is a solid shooter, well worth at least a playthrough, and it's yet another game that's currently available on the Switch eShop and the PlayStation Network as part of the Arcade Archives. So definitely don't sleep on this one, it's pretty damn good. Next up, why not, let's take a look at another Capcom shooter, the last in their storied 1940 series, and that's 1944, The Loop Master, which released for the CPS2 in 2000. This is the follow-up to 1995's 19XX, The War Against Destiny, but honestly feels like a significantly different game. For starters, you only have one playable ship, the classic P-38 Lightning, and by destroying strings of yellow planes, you can collect power-ups to increase your firepower or get some little helper planes to provide some bullets and or lasers of their own. And of course, as with any good shooter, you have a supply of super bombs, which in this case is a barrage of missiles that wipe out pretty much everything on screen. Something that has carried over is that you have a charge shot, except here you can charge it bit by bit until you're ready to use it. And when executed, you fly to a higher altitude, making you temporarily invulnerable while you fire down at your enemies. This is obviously a supremely useful ability, but there is a cooldown period after you use it, so you have to be careful with it, otherwise you could put yourself in a tough spot with no plan B. Just like 19XX, the Loop Master is a very challenging game. It's 15 stages of pure brutality, and it definitely made me happy I was playing a ROM and not shelling out quarters. It is a bit merciful in that you have a health bar and can take a few hits before being destroyed, but it's only 1 life per credit. Despite its difficulty though, this game is still a hell of a lot of fun, very enjoyable, and in terms of visuals and sound design, it's also pretty good. Nothing to write home about really, but it is a fairly colorful game with a wide variety of enemies, some big boss battles, and a soundtrack consisting mostly of kind of generic rock music, which is uncharacteristic for Capcom games, but it's not bad. Overall, this is a pretty damn good shooter that'll give you quite a challenge, and aside from the arcade, it is available now as part of the Capcom Arcade Stadium. So if you haven't already, pick this one up and give it a try. Next up, let's take a look at one hell of a fun but tough shooter, and that is Bakraid, which was released in 1999 and developed by Rising, a company with a long line of great shooters to their name, with this being a spiritual successor to Battle Garegga, which itself is very well known for its adjusting difficulty level based on your performance, and the same is true here. At the start of the game, you have your choice of a handful of different ships and a few different gameplay modes, including Training, which features 4 stages, and the difficulty turned way down, Normal, which features 6 stages, and Advanced, which features a whopping 8 stages and the difficulty turned up, which really seems excessive because Battle Bakraid already utilizes the ranking system from Battle Garegga. So as you successfully destroy enemies, collect power-ups and score bonuses, and use super bombs, the game's difficulty increases until essentially you're going to die no matter what, which, along with skimming bullets, is the only way to reduce the difficulty. I died an awful lot during this playthrough, but despite that, it was a tough game all throughout. Aside from the ranking system though, this is a fairly straightforward and fun shooter. You blast away at enemies, collect score bonuses and power-ups, and snap up the various little bomb icons that add up over time to a super bomb, which, if you're anything like me, you can blow through very quickly. This is the kind of shooter that can make you panic, as you're constantly being assailed by tons of enemies and bullets, even more so if you have the audacity to do well at the game. Battle Garegga is the far more popular game, receiving multiple console ports over the years, and having its praises sung all over YouTube, but I actually tend to prefer Battle Bakraid and, better yet, Armed Police Bat Rider, but we'll save that for another video. For now, I'll just say that this is one hell of a game, very fun indeed, with some decent graphics and sound per the typical Rising quality, and aside from the initial arcade release, Battle Bakraid has only ever had a home port on the Sega Astro City Mini V, which itself is kind of obscure, so you wouldn't be blamed for grabbing a ROM and having some fun. Battle Bakraid is damn good. For the last game in this video, I decided to again go with a somewhat obscure and, in my opinion, underrated cave shooter, and that is 1999's Guwange. Much like Pro Gear, a game developed by Cave but not published by them, instead being picked up by Capcom, Guwange was likewise published by Atlus, and this is one game that hasn't gotten nearly the love and ports that some other cave shooters have. In fact, aside from the arcade, it's only ever appeared on Xbox Live and a couple of smartphone services in Japan. That's really a shame because in the annals of great cave shooters, this one is certainly unique. It's a vertically scrolling shooter that very often shifts directions and gives you 3 different characters to play as. It's set in medieval Japan at a time when demons and spirits are roaming the land, and strange new technologies are being developed. Your 3 playable characters are possessed by Shikigami spirits, which you can make use of during gameplay. Basically, you have a rapid shot that is your less powerful option, but doesn't hinder your movement speed, and your more powerful Shikigami mode that slows your movement a bit, but your Shikigami is able to move through barriers and even slow down bullets it comes into contact with. You also have a number of super bombs to fall back on, which in this case is a powerful energy blast that can also cancel out bullets. Aside from that though, you know the drill. Blast away at enemies, collect power-ups and the numerous score bonuses that appear in the form of coins, and take out some truly epic bosses, many of which being based on creatures from Japanese folklore. That's another thing that makes Guwange especially cool: the setting, the enemies, the visuals. It's all great. It leans heavily into a feudal Japanese quasi-horror aesthetic with some trippy monsters and demons to contend with, and the soundtrack is also in keeping with this feudal Japanese aesthetic, making this a truly unique shooter, in addition to being a very fun and challenging one. Again, it's a shame that this game isn't held in as high a regard as games like Akai Katana and Death Smiles, because it certainly deserves it, If you've never played it before, then I highly recommend that you do, especially if you're a cave fan, because Guwange isn't just good, it isn't just great, it's awesome. So there you go, everybody. That's another big bunch of awesome arcade shooters. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know down in the comments what are some of your favorites arcade shooters and what games should I cover in the next video. I'm always happy to hear from you. So thanks again for watching Mad Panic Gaming, and as always, stay awesome, everybody. Goodbye.